Hi, I'm ASagnimeni, and I've been a police officer for 17 years, and I'd like to introduce you to the 4 rules of safe gun handling. The first rule of safe gun handling is that all guns are always loaded. This doesn't mean that all guns are actually in fact loaded. It means that you treat all weapons as if they're loaded. If you're treating all weapons as if they're loaded, it's impossible to, with an unloaded gun, to shoot anybody or to accidentally shoot something. So we're going to cover really quickly the basic 2 types of handguns and how to unload them. The first handgun here is a semi-automatic handgun. This one is a Glock 17. On almost all semi-automatic handguns, you will find right here on the left side of the gun or on the bottom of the gun a magazine release. By pushing that button, you enable the magazine, which is what feeds bullets into the gun, to come out of the gun. And then by grasping the top of the slide and pulling it to the rear, you open the chamber, and by opening the chamber, you allow any bullet that is in there to come out of the weapon. Do that 2 more times, and you make sure that the weapon is completely unloaded. We now have an unloaded gun for the purposes of training and instruction. If I were to put the weapon down, walk away from it, and then return to the weapon again, I would treat the weapon once again as if the weapon is loaded. That's where the caveat, all weapons are always loaded. Picking up the gun again, I would again remove the magazine if there was one, and then cycle the slide at least 2 times to make sure that the weapon was in fact empty before using it again in training purposes. With a revolver, this is a Smith & Wesson revolver. There is going to be a cylinder release on the left side of the gun that will either push forward, pull back, or push in. By doing whichever one of those 3 needs to be done, it enables the cylinder to rotate out of the weapon, and you can actually physically look and see that all 6 charging holes of the weapon are in fact empty, making this an empty weapon. Again, we would then use the weapon for training, instruction, or practice. But if we were to put the weapon down for any period of time and then return to the weapon again, rule number 1 would apply. All weapons are always loaded. We would pick the weapon up again. We would open the cylinder and visually and physically inspect to make sure that the weapon is unloaded. By following this first simple safety rule, we make sure that all weapons that we're handling when we need them to be unloaded are unloaded. Rule number 2. Never point your gun at something that you are not willing to destroy, kill, or pay for. It's a little bit funny to say pay for, but it's true. If we happen to point our weapon at something, a television, a car, a stove, and we happen to pull the trigger and we shoot a weapon because we didn't follow rule number 1 in making sure all weapons are unloaded, we're now going to have to replace that item, repair that bullet hole, buy that new TV, whatever, or potentially even suffer criminal penalties and criminal charges if we were to shoot, in fact, another person. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to fire. By following rule number 3, we make sure that the weapon will not fire no matter what happens, even if we didn't follow rule number 1 or we didn't follow rule number 2. The weapon is not going to go off by itself. A gun is a mechanical device and requires the pressure of a finger or another object on the trigger to make the weapon fire. By avoiding your finger on the trigger until you're actually ready to fire the weapon, you avoid what is called a negligent discharge, or what people like to call an accidental discharge. Rule number 4 is to be aware of your target and what is beyond and around it. What this means is that when you are ready to shoot and you are shooting at a target, you want to make sure that your target has a sufficient backstop, which will prevent your rounds from going through the target and hitting something that you do not intend it to strike or hit. You want to make sure that if you miss your target to the left, the right, above, or below, that there is not something, once again, of high value or that could die or be injured if you were to miss. So it's being aware of your target. Several other non-specific rules that are covered by a lot of different areas. If you're not familiar with a gun and you find a gun, go find an adult. Let someone who has more experience know what to do with it and to take care of it to make sure that the weapon is rendered safe. If you seek more instruction than this, please contact somebody that you know that can provide you with further instruction. Thank you.